Bankers are scared to talk to me. Thank you so much to Catapult, Seacoast Media Group, all the sponsors. I'm delighted to be here, particularly because Seacoast Media Group was actually my first job. I have the distinguished title of being the youngest newspaper boy for Foster's ever. So at 7, I had this paper out in Somersworth. If you've ever read Tom Sawyer, you'll be familiar with my management style, like when he has to get all his friends to whitewash the picket fence. I had this friend, Pat, and I'd always be like, Pat, why don't we sleep over, we'll play video games Friday night, and we'll get up really early on Saturday and run the 7 hills of Somersworth. But we'll bring this 30-pound bag of newspapers with us just for good measure. And that racket worked really well until I kept sending him to the house that had like one of those beware of dog signs. And so after a hospitalization, his mom didn't let him sleep over anymore. Long story short, Foster's and Seacoast Media Group was not just my first job, it was the first job I got fired from. So Howard, I hope I can redeem myself through some more years of service. Thank you so much. I'm excited to share the stage with 20 of you and then 10 of you. All of you are folks to watch. You know, for those of you that ever drive north, Spalding Turnpike, Route 16, and you hit exit 9, that'll take you to Dover. If you keep going a little bit further on the Spalding Turnpike, you get exit 11, take you to Rochester. There's no exit 10 on the Spalding Turnpike. If there were an exit 10, that's how you get to Somersworth. That's the city I grew up in, and it's kind of an apt description for how a lot of folks have thought about Somersworth over the years, this forgotten, non-existent place that's not worth going to. But for me, growing up in Somersworth, though it was a very poor community, it also has the largest historic district in the state. And so my parents, when they were young professionals in their 30s, were able to buy this beautiful Queen Anne Victorian home. And they wanted to make sure that this home was open to everyone in the community of Somersworth. So we never locked our doors. And every year we'd host a holiday party, and we would invite and flyer every single house in the neighborhood. No matter what apartment complex you were part of, no matter what street you lived on, everyone was welcome. And that was the community that I was raised with in Somersworth. Now, I told you I got fired from this newspaper job, and I was getting very comfortable with my $20 a week salary. And I wasn't about to go back to my $2 allowance. So I needed to make up for that, and I stumbled across entrepreneurship. So my father built me a lemonade stand, and I would cart it down to the corner of Washington and Main, and I would peddle my lemonade. And at the age of 9, I was a brutal capitalist. I would go to Market Basket and I would get the cheapest lemonade powder that you could buy. And I would fill a 12-ounce cup of ice that I got from my parents' freezer with this sort of ice lemon juice water. But I would buy 3 lemons, fresh lemons. I wouldn't cut them, I wouldn't squeeze them, I would just leave them out on the lemonade stand. So when someone came up and I said, that's a $4 lemon juice, they wouldn't ask me and I wouldn't tell them if it was freshly squeezed, but they bought it for $4 and they didn't balk at the price. I made $16 a day, you do the math. Somersworth was not a bustling downtown back then. So things were going well, and then the chief of police pulled me into his station. I was 9 years old. He said, Emmett, we have a hawkers and peddlers statute in this city. And I said, yes. He said, you're going to need to get a permit if you want to keep selling lemonade. And 9-year-old Emmett was not a fan of government bureaucracy. So that was the end of that. Closed up my lemonade stand, shut down by the government. So I decided to get involved with, my education. I had a great time at Hilltop Elementary School, went to middle school in Somersworth. I was preparing to go to Somersworth High School. But at the time, Somersworth High School was on probation. It was about to lose its accreditation. And I just sort of chalked it up to Somersworth sort of being this naturally poor community. It doesn't even have an exit off the highway. People don't really care about it. What I didn't fully understand at the time is that there was a public education funding crisis throughout our state, that communities all throughout New Hampshire were struggling with scarce resources. And I didn't appreciate it, but I now understand that we had a broken tax system that was making communities like Somersworth poorer because it was property poor and that it disenfranchised young minds with poor educational opportunities. Now, enough about my political position on New Hampshire's tax code. My parents had to make a difficult decision nevertheless. Send their kid to a school that could result in not even being eligible to apply for college, or take out a second mortgage, my mom would get a second job, and I would go away to private school. And that's the gamble that they took. And I thought I would never return to Somersworth. Sort of like that exit 10, just to be forgotten about, in the background. Went away to school, I went to Toronto for my undergrad. Sorry, I didn't spend any money in New Hampshire on my higher education. And I got into the London School of Economics for my graduate degree. I was going to move to London and never look back. And then something happened. The summer before I got on the plane to go to London, my house burned down. That Queen Anne Victorian, that historic home that had meant so much to my family and my community. And it's a difficult experience to describe what it's like to go through a house fire. But the thing that resonates most with me, that I remember the strongest, is that as I made my way up to the hill where my house was, and I saw the structure that was burning, directly across the street in the lawn of a school were 300 people from my community. Friends, family, neighbors, Pat from elementary school that helped me on the paper route. And they were bringing food, and they were bringing blankets, and they were bringing hugs. Lots of hugs. And that, for me, is when it clicked. That all those years hosting that holiday party paid back tenfold. That I had something in Somersworth that no one ever knew about that can't be found anywhere else. That love of community. And so I went off to London, and I enjoyed it. I loved the vibrancy, the loudness of the city, but I knew that I needed to come home. I knew that I had something here that I couldn't get in London or anywhere else, and that was a community that valued me. So I moved home. I set out to advance the economic and cultural development of Somersworth. I ran for city council at the ripe young age of 22, calling for bold new leadership, transparency in government. I was the Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez of my time. But I lost. By 2 points to the incumbent, a retired firefighter. And so I found myself again, just like with the lemonade stand, falling into entrepreneurship. If I was going to give back to my community and I wasn't going to be working for the city, I was going to do it in the downtown streets of Somersworth. And I thought I'd open a cafe. And so I found an abandoned strip of storefronts, and I found cheap rent in one of them, 1 block from where I had that first lemonade stand. And I called it Teetotaler, which is a really weird, silly, hard to pronounce name of a brand, but it's a pun on someone that doesn't drink alcohol. I'm now in my 8th year of sobriety. Thank you. And it was important to me that we still had in Somersworth the vibrancy and exciting programming of a cafe, but it didn't necessarily have to have alcohol. Of course, I had $50,000 in student debt, thanks to the London School of Economics. So I had no money to start it, so I turned to Kickstarter. This was 2011, it was then in its infancy, and I thought this is going to be great, free money. And I made a very embarrassing video that you can still Google, you can still find it online. And my community responded, and they gave me $10,000 to open this cafe. And I know you're like, wow, $10,000 is not enough to open a restaurant. But that's kind of the point. Despite going to the London School of Economics, I was very naive when it came to business. I didn't understand the distinction between a startup budget and an operating budget, so that on the day I opened, I'd spent all my money and I only had $60 in my bank account. I thought that, oh, maybe folks were just going to come in and I was going to make lots of money, and that's how it works. 2 people came in that day. One of them thought we were a furniture store. We had very nice furniture. And then the bills started to roll in. And this is when it got hot. You know, the financial strain and the emotional stress caused by the financial strain nearly collapsed my business. I was only 4 months into this new venture, and I was ready to close and give it up. And I was up late one night on the internet, typing away in bed. You're not supposed to do that. And I stumbled across New Hampshire's EBT program website. And it was late, and I was a little delirious, and I sent in an application. 3 days later, a check arrived in the mail. Food stamps. I bought my groceries and paid back due rent for the first time in 3 months. Food stamps saved my business. Now, I won't bore you with the rest of the tribulations of early days of running a cafe. We had modest success. So much so that I approached a developer from Portsmouth as Somersworth was starting to recognize its own value in its downtown. And I said, let's buy a building in the downtown core of Somersworth where there's more people, more traffic, and I'll move my cafe there. And he said yes. And so we set out to do that. We thought of a whole new brand, concept, a business model, new logo, new menu. We were using real lemons to make our lemonade. And that was great. And so we closed Old Teetotaler and prepared for the new one. The only problem is I didn't have any money then. I had no income. And I needed to still pay rent. And so in the interim, I just got a little consulting gig. I thought, okay, well, I'll go to Portsmouth or to Boston and I'll just consult for some startups. Has anyone worked for a startup company before? I know you're very shy about it. So startups loved me because you'll all know this racket if you've worked for one. They hire you and they give you this amazing offer letter with equity and they give you a title like SVP of operations and you're loving it, you're thriving, you're with ambitious people, and then 3 weeks later the CEO comes into the room and is like, we have no money, we have no product, we have no investments, we hope you'll stick around and keep working for us, it'll pay off in the end. And for me, I was like, I've been working for free my whole life, I love this. These co-working spaces in Cambridge have snack bars. Like, I was totally down to work for as cheap as I needed to just to pay my rent in Somersworth. So I did that for a little while. I got involved in the startup community down in Cambridge while I was sort of waiting for Teetotaler to open. And I'd go to events much like this and just, mingle and meet other people that were sort of in the same sphere. And I met someone that was talking about big data and machine learning and artificial intelligence and climate data and weather data. And I thought, that's pretty boring. I'm not interested. But I exchanged cards with everyone, and this guy got back to me and he said, hey, well, we're looking for just a marketing consultant. And it turns out he was the former CEO of LexisNexis. For the millennials or Generation Y in the room, LexisNexis is like what there was before Google or Yahoo. So I was like, okay, this is a big deal. I'll take the gig. And that kind of went on for a little while. And he said, well, we have a job for you. Would you be our director of marketing? Again, fancy title. I was number 5 in the door, director of marketing. And I said yes. He said, great. The company's based in Washington, D.C. Pack your bags, come down, here you go. And I said, no, I'm not interested. Somersworth is my home. He said, well, how about I offer you half the salary? And I said, that's 4 times more than I'm making. Of course I'll do it. So I became the director of marketing for this small startup. It was called Weather Analytics. We worked with a lot of weather information, climate data to sell to big companies. And we grew. We were successful in some ways. We expanded, and we had to hire people. I, as the director of marketing, had to hire a graphic designer and a communications person. And I said, well, why don't we hire them in New Hampshire? And they said, what? Why don't we hire them up in New Hampshire? And they said, okay. I said, why don't we hire them in Somersworth, New Hampshire? And they said, where is that? And at the time, just sort of being involved in my community, I was running these roundtables of activists and entrepreneurs, folks that had started something, a project, a business, an art show in their towns, whether it was Somersworth or Rochester or Dover. And so I invited all the executives of this growing early-stage startup company, and I brought them up to Somersworth, New Hampshire for a weekend. Majestic, beautiful, formerly Great Falls, Somersworth. And it just so happened that there was one of these summits taking place, and they sat in a room much like this and listened to people in their 20s and 30s talk about starting the Rochester Museum of Fine Arts. That's Rochester, New Hampshire Museum of Fine Arts. Starting the Post-Landfill Action Network that fights climate change in universities across the country. And they were impressed by what they saw. And it was like that Exit 10 effect. They had just never thought of it. They had never seen it. They had never experienced it. They couldn't have known that there was such talent and creativity and ambition in these small communities in New Hampshire. And 4 months later, we signed a lease on the Canal Street Mills in Somersworth, and we had 6 employees making full-time salary tech job work in Somersworth, New Hampshire. And the company grew. We got bigger. So big, in fact, that we had to move into a mill in Dover, which it now is housed. We bought another company called Athenium, and it's now called Athenium Analytics. And there's now 45 people working at it in Dover, New Hampshire. There's over 90 people across the country that work for Athenium Analytics. It's a $100 million company. And by this time, I was designated, fancy title, the Chief Product Officer of Athenium Analytics. What a great story, right? Like, what a totally good way to wrap this up. Except you're probably all wondering what happened to Teetotaler. Teetotaler had to open. And at this point in time, I had to reconcile what my values were and what I wanted to do. And I thought, well, I could just go on selling machine learning software to reinsurance companies in Zurich and maybe make a couple matcha lattes on the side. But then something happened, or rather someone. There was a young boy named Michael Cummings who was a middle schooler when I had my first Teetotaler, and he would come into the shop and he would be with a gaggle of other middle schoolers who were very shy and awkward. And he would come right up to the counter and he'd slap his hand down with a $20 bill and say, 4 taro bubble teas, please. And on his hand, he had these like pink glue-on nails. And I thought, that is so incredible. I went to Somersworth Middle School. 1, I did not have that level of confidence. 2, I did not have a $20 bill to get taro bubble teas with my friends. But 3, had I wanted to wear pink nails, I couldn't have imagined doing it. And so there was something special I knew about Michael and about his experience at Somersworth Middle School. And so when new Teetotaler came around, our new cafe, Michael was now 17 years old. A high schooler and more idealized version of himself. Still the pink nails, but also pink eyeshadow, pink lipstick, but still the 5 o'clock shadow you'd expect from a teenager. And I was just so impressed by this flamboyant, effeminate individual just living as a different person with the confidence and flair that he had. And I said, we need to do something together. Teetotaler and Michael need to work together. So we thought we'd do an advertisement. We did a big photo shoot, and we thought maybe we'll do like a direct mail or a Facebook ad. We ultimately settled on a 30-foot billboard in Somersworth. So we put up a big billboard on this, a big banner, a big advertisement on this billboard on like a back road of Somersworth. And it was Michael wearing like a pink crop top and cut off booty shorts and like little pink pumps, full pink lip gloss, and he's like kind of like spread out like a pinup model from the 80s and eating a delicious breakfast sandwich from Teetotaler. And we had this little tagline we put on. We said, "I like my men like I like my coffee." Very corny. With breakfast at Teetotaler. It's on my shirt. It's almost like I planned that. We sell these. And so we put up this billboard, 30-foot billboard of this sort of genderqueer, very campy billboard in Somersworth, New Hampshire. It doesn't even have an exit off of the highway. Some people responded. But you know what's coming. The trolls of Facebook had to feed. And the haters have such a good place in this universe. After all of the sort of weird comments, not from within our community, but, from Florida, about how inappropriate this was, we suddenly found ourselves, Teetotaler, on the cover of the Huffington Post. The small little cafe on the cover of the Huffington Post. And so you can imagine that there was some fanfare. Folks were excited. They're like, I want to meet that model, or I want to taste that breakfast sandwich. But more than that, what it did is it stood as a signal to people outside of Somersworth that though we aren't thought of and though we are often forgotten, we are a place that doesn't just accept those that are different or those that are queer, but we celebrate and embrace difference in the LGBTQ community. And that is what that billboard did and what Michael's experience with Teetotaler did. And so at this point I realized, just as I had learned earlier in my life, that the community of Somersworth really was something special. That even if nobody else knew about it, it was somewhere that valued not just me, but had my same values. And so I quit my job, and I left the salary, the position, everything behind. And you may think, 1, I'm pretty crazy. I am. I don't know if you've seen how I'm dressed. But 2, what I actually learned is that if you run a business that doesn't just speak your own values, but shouts your values, you will be successful, you can be profitable, and you will reach far wider than you might have imagined if you cater to just sort of a typical expectation of what a brand is supposed to do, or a business is supposed to do. And that's what Teetotaler's become. You know, last year, we were ground zero for organizing around the transgender anti-discrimination bill in New Hampshire State House. That's a bill that passed a Republican-controlled state house. And we've stuck to our roots of being a sober space, a space that supports recovery efforts, not just in Somersworth, but in New Hampshire and southern Maine. We've stuck to our programming for youth, and particularly queer youth. Teetotaler has the distinction of having the largest teen drag show in North America. And you might be thinking, I've never been to a teen drag show. But if you hadn't seen a 16-year-old boy in 6-inch heels and a wig and a Mariah Carey track mixed with an Azalea Banks song, you have not seen or heard anything. And in fact, the host of our teen drag show, the after-school special, Ray of Sunshine, was just named the first drag queen prom queen in New England at Oyster River High School in Durham. We own that. And of course, you don't have the largest teen drag show in North America without getting the attention of national politics. And so what seemed to happen is that Teetotaler has become a stopover for a lot of folks that are hoping to become our next president. And already in these early days, we've had almost a dozen candidates stop through. And I think the reason is not just that they want to connect with activists in the LGBTQ community or activists in the recovery community, but because the story of Somersworth represents something that so many communities have struggled with in this country for so long, about being forgotten or being off the radar. And so it's kind of special to me when someone like Beto O'Rourke or Kirsten Gillibrand or Julian Castro makes the trek up to Teetotaler. Because you literally can't get there from here. There's still no exit 10. But in an event tonight where we're celebrating and honoring people that up until this point maybe haven't been watched, but they've been caring about the work they do, they've been committed to their values regardless of who's watching, is a testament that you don't have to wait for someone to build you an exit 10. You do it yourself. Thank you so much.